He's the kid we all love to hate. An inept king with a monstrous temperament and penchant for cruelty and sadism. A child's death should not warrant cheers or laughter. And yet... Yes! Die, boy! But was Joffrey irrefutably on the path to evil and incompetence from birth, or with just a bit more care taken in his rearing and, a little less pissing off of homicidal grandmas, could he have been a competent and noble person? We'll be looking at both his evil and his incompetence as factors. So, can we make him a nicer person, and can we make him a more capable person? Had to make it a hard mode challenge, didn't we, Tom? Discord is here, guys, Patreon's here if you want to show some extra love, and please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. We have some very fun stuff in the pipeline, including the first entry of the Drogo invading Westeros series. It's coming! By golly, it's coming! Promise, because Tom keeps making me plug it so I can't back out of finishing the script. You'd make a good player of the game, Tom. Too good. Before we touch on any potential redemption arcs that may occur, it's probably best to have a look at the little bastard's psychology and how it affects his morality. Let's get our tweed jackets on, Tom, get comfy in our armchairs, bust out our pipes, and pretend we know what we're talking about as we play Psychopath. Or, something else. Just to be clear, neither myself or Tom is a qualified psychiatrist or psychologist. I studied it a little as part of my degree, but still, nowhere near enough to be considered an expert. Anyway, how can we describe Joffrey as a person? Besides the fact he's a piece of human excrement. Now, I hear it said an awful lot that Joffrey is a psychopath, which I can see the argument for when you observe some of his behaviors, but I'm not sure this is really the case. The kid is definitely rocking some serious cluster B red flags, but I'm not sure it's psychopathy, despite certain markers, since it's key to note that traits do overlap between disorders, especially within the same cluster. So, what are his most prominent observable personality traits? Let's start with the traits that are associated with psychopaths. He has a grandiose sense of self, making him as narcissistic as his mother. He's clearly lacking for empathy and guilt, that much is true. He's also very capable of conforming to social norms and projecting superficial charm. Well, the book version can, when it suits him. Now, those are psychopathic traits, but that's not all there is to him. He's also sadistic as fuck, prone to bouts of impulse, emotionally unstable in all regards, and lacks for predatory cunning. Seeks to justify his morally wrong actions, very capable of experiencing a typical fear response, that typical bit is quite important, and he can't form and maintain stable or long-term relationships with anyone he does not possess authority over, besides a very choice few. Well, basically his mummy. These additional traits kind of throw that psychopath idea out of the window. Contrary to popular belief, psychopaths often aren't particularly sadistic, as in, they generally don't derive joy from others' pain, as that often requires a form of empathy known as cognitive empathy, which psychopaths tend to lack in entirety. This isn't to say you can't get a sadistic rise out of a psychopath, but the lengths you'd have to take it to are beyond extreme, and certainly beyond the acts that amuse this little prick. They usually seek satisfaction through more baseline pleasures, like drugs and sex, to get their dopamine hits. Also of interest, psychopaths tend to get a hit of the good stuff when they successfully deceive someone. When psychopaths torture and inflict pain on others, there's usually an objective behind it beyond merely enjoying the act. On top of this, they tend not to feel either end of the spectrum of emotions, be it joy or sadness, or even anger to any strong degree, which can't be said for Joffrey and his childish as fuck unstable outbursts and sadistic glee. Psychopaths also don't experience fear in the same way a neurotypical person does. They can feel fear, contrary to popular belief, but they often respond with excitement or agitation, with the perception of being confronted with a challenge to overcome, rather than a more typical fight or flight response and displays of nerves or straight-up cowardice, which is very unlike Joffrey, who becomes a spineless pussy the instant he is legitimately threatened. Joffrey also seeks to justify his actions, often excusing his behavior and leaning on his right as king, which does tell us, to some ever so small degree, that he knows his actions are morally wrong, which leads on to the notion that he, however small, does have the capacity for empathy and guilt, and, has something that resembles a conscience. Psychopaths don't do this whatsoever. Their utter lack of conscience often leaves them oblivious to the idea of right and wrong, and they simply don't care. They wouldn't say, "I did it because it's my right as king." They'd say, "I did it, and what?" This, coupled with the other traits mentioned, puts Joffrey into a different camp of pop psychology cluster B. The two strongest candidates, if I were to make an educated guess, would be BPD, otherwise known as borderline personality disorder, or sociopathy. Joffrey has never really displayed any kind of fear of abandonment or severe identity disturbance, besides the very natural trait of wanting to be like who he thinks is his father, which are pretty crucial markers of BPD. So, ruling that out, what are we left with? The kid is a fucking sociopath through and through. This is reinforced further when you combine his observable personality traits with his upbringing as a spoiled, entitled brat with a highly neglectful father whom he idolized, and a mollycoddling mother who went out of her way to praise, excuse, justify, and cover up his negative behavior, which, need I remind you, once involved cutting open a pregnant cat just to see what was inside, then presenting said results to father, whom responded with violence. The ingredients are there for all to see. So, what does this mean for Joffrey in our quest to redeem his morality? Well, it's actually one of the slightly better outcomes. As in, it's not the apple with the most razor blades in it, but it's still full of the sharp stuff, and you've still got to take a bite. Joffrey, like most sociopaths, is a result of his life experiences, and as such, it displays he can be influenced by external factors. It's often said that psychopaths are born and sociopaths are made. While this isn't exactly correct, as people can develop psychopathy later in life, there is a modicum of truth to it, and psychopathy is linked to genetics and natural brain activity, and thus it's much harder to alter behavior, as it's kind of a part of their DNA. Though neither is particularly easy to treat, overall it's usually easier to modify the behavior of a sociopath than it is a psychopath, as sociopaths do have the capacity for emotions and empathy even if it's highly suppressed, i.e., they do have the tools, they just need to learn to use them properly, whereas psychopaths, often through no fault of their own, just don't have the means to empathize or question the morality of actions. Like, literally, the part of the brain responsible for this doesn't work for most psychopaths, no matter the stimuli. So, to cut a long story short, you can get a sociopath to feel emotions and realize the negative consequences their actions have wrought through extensive and long-term exposure to positive external stimuli, providing of course you hard-check their attempts to manipulate and deceive you, and trust me, they will try that in the initial stages and test if they can pull the wool over your eyes with a facade of self-improvement. Whereas for a psychopath, you kind of have to make them realize it's in their best interests to behave a certain way, often requiring consistent rewards that are more lucrative than what they can achieve with their self-interested predatory behavior. In other words, you're not really changing them, you're still playing their game, but using your rules, if that makes sense. Also, I'm just going to take this moment to point out that not all psychopaths are criminal and predatory. Many are capable of immense good in our world. Their lack of empathy and different response to fear can actually be put to good use. Sorry for the tangent, guys. I just think it's worth noting they aren't all Patrick Batemans and Gregor Cleganes, and many do understand their disorder and deserve respect, and not to be othered. Anyway, if you have any professional input for this section, please feel free to share. I'm looking forward to one of our regular viewers, James, sharing his thoughts, applying his experience as a criminologist. I'll be on the lookout for your comment, dude. Anyway, back to the Turd King. We've covered the psychological aspects that color his morality, but what about his competence? Could Joffrey actually be a capable individual? The simple answer is yes, if he wanted to be. He's oblivious to the workings of the real world in many ways and extremely naive. But that is to be expected from a 13-year-old. Joffrey is well-educated, strong-willed, and while in the show they go out of their way to make the handsome lad Jack Gleeson look more like a stunted incest goblin with his posture and makeup, the books make it clear Joffrey is tall and strong for his age. With a bit of focus, well, let's be honest, with a bit less time spent with Cersei and a bit more time spent with firmer hands to direct his strong willpower into more productive ventures alongside keeping him in check, Joffrey has the potential to be a very accomplished individual. It's even hinted he could be a great warrior were he not a pampered little mummy's boy. A big deal is made of Joffrey's dancing abilities being excellent. This is George's subtle way of telling us Joffrey is highly coordinated and has great footwork. Know what else requires good coordination and great footwork? Swing! While Joffrey is one half this bitch, it's also good to remember he's one half this guy too. And arrogance and incest aside, Jaime is ultimately a good man and an exceptionally capable guy in leadership and martial aptitudes. The leadership stuff more so after he loses his hand, but still, it's there. With a difference in upbringing and better behavior management, it really is not a stretch to assume Joffrey may have taken more after his birth father than his mother in many regards. The problem with Joffrey's competence really does come down to Cersei. She's guarded him from the real world and fed him enough ego pie to believe he is beyond fault and beyond the need of personal growth, making a U-turn in his character quite the challenge and requiring a very firm pair of hands. So, the initial premise of the video. Is anyone up to the task? Could this little shit be redeemed in both morality and competence from the point we meet him? The answer is, believe it or not, yes. But at this point, you're talking extreme measures. Sociopathy can be treated, and in some cases, sort of, kind of, but not really, reversed with the correct approach and patience. But Cersei, and let's be fair, Robert also has done an awful lot of damage here, and undoing it will take some serious work. Of course, there are many ways we could achieve this through contrivance or time travel or our own world practices, such as employing CBT and other behavior management therapies, but as far as I know, there aren't any licensed therapists in Westeros. So, are there any in-world ways he could have been set straight and become a better person from the point we meet him? Either morally, competently, or, seven allow it, both. I can think of two. The first solution would be to have him fostered by someone who, isn't Cersei. But even then, that's not far enough. You'd have to remove Cersei from the picture entirely, so good life lessons and time can slowly but surely do the rest. There are, of course, many great options for potential foster parents, but Ned and the Menace come to mind as the two most ideal ones. Ned would show Joffrey compassion and love, along with teaching Joffrey the value of honor and good leadership, whilst also having the intelligence to see through Joffrey's initial attempts at deception and manipulation, and a firm enough hand to put Joff in his place when he inevitably starts putting his foot out of line. The cultural shift from the poncy southern customs to the hard living at north would also toughen the boy up, and as time goes by, instill in him a firm sense of discipline. It wouldn't happen overnight, and there would be many a teething incident, but eventually Joffrey would probably soften up when it comes to emotion and empathy, and toughen up when it comes to hard work and discipline. That or Ned unwittingly creates Ramsay Bolton 2.0. Under Stannis, Joffrey is going to learn the meaning of right and wrong. He's going to learn it very quickly. And with his probable early bad behavior, he's for damn sure going to learn it the hard way. Whereas Ned would soften Joffrey up and remold him into a new person, Stannis would break Joffrey into tiny pieces, then put him back together again. A few years with Stannis as a foster parent, and let's face it, Joffrey would be unrecognizable. These two would be the best choices in my opinion, but neither are particularly feasible in-world options, since nowhere near enough time passes between Joffrey's introduction in the first book to the point where he becomes king for their parenting styles and life morals to take effect. Even if you could somehow fiddle the story so he ends up in their care, and Stannis conveniently forgets all about the illegitimacy of his birth. And that's the case for even a typically balanced personality. Forget about someone who is sociopathic like Joffrey is. Once that crown goes on Joffrey's head, the power trip swiftly follows, and he isn't going to listen to anyone. Well, almost. So, is there an in-world option that could have managed the Boy King once crowned and still redeem him? The answer is half yes and half no. Tywin. Tywin is perhaps the only person who Joffrey both respects and, perhaps more importantly, fears enough to fall in line behind, even when he's got that pointy gold hat. Tom has often put forward the notion that Tywin hadn't given up on Joffrey turning into a halfway decent king like other players had, and yeah, I agree with him. Tywin, had he somehow managed to avoid his self-inflicted demise, did plan to take a more hands-on approach in King's Landing, and this likely involved becoming Joffrey's mentor in all things political. He'd planned to get Cersei away from the capital, and by extension the king, which would have removed her poisonous influence and enabling behaviors, and through tough love and firm discipline, Tywin probably could have made Joffrey a much more capable king and a much better player of the game. However, as previously stated, this would only be a half victory in the quest for redemption. Tywin would no doubt squash out Joffrey's wasteful and unnecessary cruelty, but the old lion is not exactly a bastion of moral goodness himself. Tom thinks it's more probable he would teach Joffrey how to hide his more sadistic impulses from the public eye and use them more pragmatically rather than stamping them out. And once again, I agree with him. Seven hells, Tom, what happened to us? We used to disagree and be at each other's throats with debates like this all the time. Good times. So, yeah, Tywin could redeem Joffrey's ineptitude and slightly lessen his moral deficiencies. But is there any way to achieve both? I can only think of one place and one group of people that would net you that outcome. This icy hellhole. Desperate times call for desperate measures, but if you truly wanted the best shot at fully redeeming the incompetent, twisted little incest goblin that he is, service to the Watch is your best hope. Getting him sent here requires a touch more contrivance than we're used to. Let's assume Stannis wins Blackwater and Joffrey catches the Manus on a good day when he's brought before him to beg for mercy, and Stannis allows him to take the Black despite the whole abomination thing. Yeah, that'll do, Tom. So how would he fare? Assuming he survived repeatedly having the absolute living shit kicked out of him by the other lads during the teething period in which he would most certainly be acting like a spoiled, insufferable brat and trying to lord it over, well, everyone, the Watch would probably straighten Joffrey out, as he really wouldn't have a choice. He would learn the value of discipline, loyalty, and sacrifice, or he would die. Simple as. Given time and exposure to the right people like Jon, Maester Aemon, and Donal Noy, the Jaime and Joffrey might start showing itself. He might develop compassion, loyalty to his brothers, and possibly even become one of the better swordsmen in the Watch, with no one coddling him during training and letting him learn from his mistakes. Of course, we would be remiss if we don't mention that exposure to the wrong people in the Watch, of whom which Joffrey may gravitate towards, will have the opposite effect. Too much time with Janos Slynt or Dirk or Clubfoot Carl will probably make Joffrey 10 times worse than he already is. Of note, Sir Alistair is unlikely to be an ally, and likely to give Joff the same reception he gave Jon. Remember, the boy is either half Baratheon and half Lannister, or a full-blooded Lannister, depending on what Stannis divulges to the Lord Commander. Two family names that won't court any affection in Ser form. However, this could actually help in fostering a small degree of camaraderie between Joffrey and Jon. A bit like how it did with Sam, but maybe not as quick, and certainly not as warm. But still, it might expose Joffrey to Jon's influence a little faster. Joffrey at the Wall is actually quite an interesting what-if that could warrant its own video in all honesty. Tom, make a note. But to conclude, that would be our approach. It's not hopeless, Joffrey is 13 and there is still time to set him right if events played out a little differently. But either Tywin or the Watch would truly have their work cut out for them. That's our thoughts anyway. Now it's time to get yours. Do you think Joffrey was totally irredeemable, or do you think there's other solutions we haven't mentioned, or do you think differently about Joffrey's psychology? Let us know in the comments. And that's our take. What did we get right, what did we miss, and what did we get wrong? I'm sure you'll have no problem telling us. Thanks for watching, guys.